Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights Classics. Tonight we open the pages of a timeless tale, one that has drifted across centuries to find you here beneath the hush of evening. It is a story of voice and longing, of the quiet courage to surrender and be still. A story that does not speak of loss, but of peace, of finding home in silence. So settle in and let the old story become a new dream. When you're ready, our story begins. Before we begin tonight's story, if these moments of stillness bring you comfort, you may wish to gently subscribe so you can return to this quiet space whenever you need to rest. Your presence here means so much. Beneath the surface of the world, the ocean sleeps and wakes in its own slow rhythm, the oldest breath there is. It draws the moonlight in and lets it go again, shaping the tides, shaping time itself. Everything that lives within it moves to that pulse. The patient sway of water through light, the soft exhale of bubbles rising toward the stars they will never touch. The sea is vast, but never empty. It hums quietly to itself, 1,000 notes, deep woven from the sighs of shells and the distant moan of whales. Here, where sunlight thins into dreams, lies a kingdom of coral and shadow. Its towers are not built by hand, but grown by memory, stone gardens draped in lace-like seaweed, jeweled with sleeping anemones that open only when the current whispers their name. Every color is muted here, as if the world itself were wrapped in gauze. Even brightness arrives, gently filtered through waves, until it feels like something you could rest upon. Among these calm expanses drifts a mermaid, not the kind sung of in tales of storm and shipwreck, but a quieter soul. Her tail moves like silk, drawn through air, catching light that isn't quite sunlight. Her hair trails behind her, long and slow, mingling with the moving grasses. When she turns her head, her gaze carries the unhurried curiosity of someone who has never needed to hurry. She is the youngest of her sisters. Though she often feels she belongs to the sea more than to any home within it. While the others laugh and gather near glowing reefs, she lingers at the edge of silence where sound fades and the water deepens into stillness. She does not speak much, not because she lacks words, but because she understands what few do, that silence can hold more meaning than sound. The sea speaks to her in ways that cannot be written. In the pull of current against her palm, in the gentle tremor of distant movement, she hears its language. Sometimes she rests against the sand and feels the earth breathing beneath, slow and steady, like the chest of a sleeping god. When she opens her hands, small shells settle there, tiny spirals carved by time. She holds them to her ear and listens to the faraway hum inside a sound, both endless and near. It is the sea, remembering itself. Her home lies in a hollow of rock draped with drifting weeds. There are no walls, no doors, only the soft boundary between shadow and shimmer. Around her, creatures move with quiet purpose, translucent jellyfish pulsing like thoughts, small silver fish turning as one, their scales catching what light remains. At the entrance of her dwelling, she keeps smooth stones she has gathered from far corners of the sea. Each is a memory of a place, a season, a sound. When she arranges them, the water hums a little differently, as if recognizing their order. The sea around her is not a place of danger, but of constant lull. Even its storms are slow born of breath, never anger. When the upper world howls here, it feels only like a deeper sigh, the body of the ocean turning in its sleep. The mermaid knows that above her somewhere there are winds and rains and fires of day. But those things belong to another realm. Here, all things dissolve into calm. Sometimes she rises. Not far, only enough to see how light behaves when it meets the surface. It trembles, breaks, reforms. The sky beyond looks close enough to touch, yet remains untouchable. From below, the world above appears as if painted on glass, soft clouds, drifting like thoughts that forgot their meaning. The pale disk of the moon resting on invisible water. She lingers there, suspended between two worlds, one she knows and one she dreams of. It is not longing for escape, but wonder, the ache of beauty too distant to hold. When she descends again, the silence greets her like an embrace. Every sound softens. Even her heartbeat seems to slow to match the rhythm of the deep. The water has weight, yet it carries her as though she were a part of its own body. She drifts through columns of bubbles rising from unseen fissures, watching them gather light and vanish. In their brief shimmer, she imagines the lives of stars. Her sisters tell stories of sailors and sunken treasures of storms that swallowed ships whole. They delight in the telling, in the thrill of what-ifs. But she listens quietly, smiling, and thinks instead of smaller wonders, how coral glows faintly at dusk, how sand moves like smoke beneath the sweep of her hand. The world above may have its fires and voices, but this world has patience. Here, everything waits, the kind of waiting that is not emptiness, but peace. She often sits upon a wide stone shelf where seaweed curls like ribbons around her arms. From here, she can see the wide valley stretching toward the dark. It feels infinite. Sometimes she hums softly, though even that sound is swallowed almost instantly by the sea. Her song is not for others to hear. It is simply to remind herself that she exists a small thread of melody in an endless tapestry of blue. And yet, when she stops, the silence seems to hum back as though the ocean has taken up her tune. In this place, even time seems to drift. Days are marked not by sun or shadow, but by the slow migration of color. When the water brightens, it is morning. When it dims to indigo, it is night. And when it grows pale with moonlight, that silver light that bends and trembles, it is the hour of dreamings. During these nights, the mermaid often lies upon the sand with her tail folded beneath her, her arms cradling her head. Small creatures glow faintly around her, tracing constellations that only the sea knows. If she listens closely, she can hear the heartbeat of the ocean, deep, slow, resonant. It is the same rhythm she has known all her life, the same rhythm that moves through her veins. Perhaps she thinks this is what love truly is, to belong so completely to the world that even your silence becomes part of its song. When she closes her eyes, her thoughts drift like currents. She dreams of light, not of the sun, but of something gentler. The soft gleam that touches the surface of still water at dawn. She dreams of sound, not of words, but of tone, resonance, breath. And in these dreams, she feels herself dissolve not into nothing, but into everything. Her voice merges with the sea's voice. Her heart beats in rhythm with the tide. And somewhere above, far beyond her reach, the moon gazes down, the same moon that has watched over every dream since time began. For now, all is quiet. The sea, the sand, the slow pulse of life, all breathing together. Nothing asks for more. Nothing seeks to change. In this still cradle of the world, peace is not something to be found. It simply is. And so the little mermaid sleeps, not as a creature of myth, but as a thought of the ocean itself, drifting through its own endless lullaby. The water folds around her like memory, and in that deep embrace, the story begins to hum, a sound too soft for waking ears, but perfect for dreams. The ocean turned slowly around her as days slipped past like quiet thoughts. In the deep places where she drifted, there was no strict dividing line between one moment and the next. Light waxed and waned, colors shifted from soft turquoise to muted indigo, and the young mermaid moved through it all, as if moving through a single endless breath. Silence accompanied her not as absence, but as company. A gentle presence that rested on her shoulders and wrapped around her like a shawl of water. Yet, even within that vast calm, there were sounds, small, patient, and constant. When a school of fish changed direction, their bodies made a faint, trembling rustle like pages of a book turning in slow motion. When currents found narrow passages between rock, they whispered in low tones, weaving through the stone as if telling secrets. And far beyond sight, whales called to one another in deep, resonant notes that traveled through the water and settled in her bones. Their voices did not need translation. They were simply there, like the slow tolling of bells in a submerged cathedral. The young mermaid had been born into this music. Yet it was only now that she began to listen with intention. She noticed how the sea changed tone with depth high and shimmering near the surface low and humming in the trenches. Even the sand had its murmurs when it shifted beneath the weight of time. It produced a faint, sliding sigh. She realized that nothing in her world was truly silent. Everything spoke in its own soft way. There were days when she would rest upon a ledge of rock, her tail drifting lazily with the current, and close her eyes to hear more clearly. Without sight, sound unfolded wider. Small shrimps clicking amid the coral. The distant crackle of tiny creatures feeding along ancient stone. The occasional faint thud of something far away falling to the sea floor. A shell perhaps, or a forgotten fragment of the world above. Layer upon layer, the ocean's voice revealed itself so gentle that it could only be heard by someone who had the patience to listen. In those hours, the mermaid's own voice remained quiet. She had never thought much about it. It was simply one more tone among many, another note in the vast chord of the sea. But now, as she listened more deeply, curiosity began to rise within her like a small, unnoticed bubble. What was her voice truly? How far did it travel? Did it shape the water in some tender way, just as the whales' songs did, just as the currents shaped sand? One evening, when the water glowed with the faint blue of bioluminescent life, she floated alone above a wide field of gently wavering grass. Above her, the surface was a distant ceiling of silver stirred by the movement of unseen winds. Below, the dark descended in soft gradients, the world dissolving into mystery. In that in-between space, she let a small sound leave her lips. No words, just a tone. It was a note she had hummed before without thinking, a fragment of something she carried inside. The sound vibrated in her chest, passed through her throat, and drifted outward. She could feel the way it moved the water around her, just a little like a ripple. Tiny creatures nearby shifted their delicate bodies, turning as if to acknowledge the disturbance. The note faded quickly, swallowed by the sheer size of the sea. But for the brief moment it existed, it had been hers, a small bright thread in the ocean's tapestry. She hummed again, a little longer this time. The second note joined the first in memory, and together they formed the beginning of a pattern. Her voice was softer than the whale's resonance, gentler than the current's murmur, but it had something they did not, a fragile, searching quality like light tracing the edge of a shell. It felt as though she were not only sounding a note, but listening for an answer to a question she had not yet put into words. Her sisters sometimes sang together near the coral gardens, weaving clear, bright melodies that flowed between the stone towers and drew playful fish closer. Their songs were joyous, confident, made for laughter and echoes. The young mermaid often joined them, her own voice blending seamlessly into theirs. In those moments, the sea seemed to glow a little warmer, as if their music had stirred some hidden light inside it. But afterward, when the laughter faded and the others drifted away, she always felt a gentle pull back towards solitude. Alone, her song was different. She found herself drawn to tones that were slower, longer, sparse, stray notes, separated by stretches of quiet. A sound, then a pause to feel its fading. Another sound, then a longer wait. Soon, her singing became less like a performance and more like a conversation between her and the water itself. Each note seemed to ask, "What are you?" And the silence between them seemed to answer, "I am here." One day, she discovered an old hollow shell tangled in seaweed near a cluster of rocks. Its surface was worn smooth, its spiral opening like a small, patient ear. She freed it gently, untwining the slender strands of weed. With careful fingers, feeling the soft drag of plant against skin. When she held the shell close, she could hear the familiar ocean hum inside that soft, uninterrupted sigh that lived in all such chambers. Yet this time she listened differently. She hummed a single note into the shell's mouth and paused. The sound went in circled and returned faintly, altered thinner, higher, as though the shell had tasted the note and given it back in its own small voice. The mermaid's eyes widened, not with shock, but with a wondering calm. Her voice could take on new shapes when it met other forms. The shell was not just an object, it was a listener and then an echo. Day by day, she experimented. A lower tone drawn out slowly sent a gentle shiver through the shell's inner curves. A short, bright sound bounced back quickly, like a tiny bell ringing in an enclosed space. Her fingers traced the shell's ridges, feeling the fine lines carved by time, and she realized that sound was not just something that passed through the sea. It was something that touched things, entered them, lingered and changed. As her understanding of sound deepened, so too did her awareness of its limits. She noticed how quickly her song thinned when she swam near open expanses. Notes that felt strong and vibrant close to her chest became soft and distant when cast too far. The sea was kind, but it was vast, and her voice delicate, as it was traveled only a little way before being folded back into the larger silence. Still, she continued to sing, each note a quiet act of exploration, like placing small lanterns along the path of her curiosity. At times, when a whale's low call passed near, she would hum softly in its wake, sending her slender voice along the path of the deeper tone. For a few heartbeats, the two sounds coexisted, hers light and searching, the whale's ancient and sure. They did not clash. They layered like two colors of light seen through water. In those layered moments, she felt her place in the world more clearly, not as something grand or loud, but as a small, distinct thread woven into a greater fabric. Sound, she realized, was not just noise. It was presence. It was a way of saying, I am here without needing to be seen. Her voice was the shape her being took when it tried to touch the world beyond her skin. And every time it faded, it did not truly disappear. It became part of the ocean's endless, gentle hum. The thought settled within her, soft and luminous. It made her gaze upward more often toward the blurred silver of the surface, where another world waited. In that world, she imagined voices moving not through water, but through open air, freer perhaps or sharper, able to travel farther without being softened. What would it feel like, she wondered, for sound to ring clear, without the weight of water? What would her voice become if it could move through such a space? These questions did not disturb her. They unfolded like slow flowers in the garden of her mind. She did not long for escape, only for understanding. The sea was her home, and its silence was her comfort. Yet beneath that comfort, something was beginning to awaken, a tender curiosity about what existed beyond the familiar embrace of the deep. Her voice had shown her that there were different ways to be heard. Now, the thought of other realms of sound hovered at the edge of her awareness, like distant light at the edge of sleep. As night gathered once more, the water shifted toward deeper blues. Lanternfish lit their tiny stars, drifting in slow constellations around her. She settled upon her favorite stone shelf, the shell cupped in her hands, and let one last note fall into it. It swirled, changed, and returned to her as a faint silver whisper. She closed her eyes and listened to it fade, feeling a quiet warmth in her chest. The ocean hummed on. Her thoughts drifted with it, following currents she could not see. Somewhere beyond, above the soft, shimmering ceiling of the sea, other voices were moving through a different kind of space. One day, she would come to know that world. For now, it was enough to rest inside this one, cradled by water, wrapped in the whispers beneath the surface. The days unfolded like tides arriving, withdrawing, returning again until at last, one evening came that felt a little different. The water was unusually clear, as if it too wished to rest, and even the drifting sands seemed still. Above, faint ribbons of light rippled down from the surface, moving in soft rhythms that invited her upward. The young mermaid floated among them for a long time, undecided feeling each pale thread of brightness brush across her hands like the touch of silks. For weeks, she had listened to the sea's hidden music and to her own small voice within it. But now, another sound was stirring something she could not quite name. It was not loud. It was a quiet invitation, a soft pull toward the place where the water met the sky. She rose slowly, letting the pressure lighten around her body, letting the familiar darkness of the deep fall away beneath her like sleep itself. The journey upward was like ascending through memory. Colors shifted from blue to silver. Warmth became cool. The scent of salt grew sharper. Tiny bubbles accompanied her darting past her cheeks like scattered pearls. The water around her thinned until she could feel the faint tremor of air above a new kind of silence waiting to meet her. When she broke the surface, the world opened, vast, shimmering, unfamiliar. The ocean stretched out before her, endless and calm, the moon resting upon it like a great coin of light. Every ripple became a mirror, every mirror a moment of reflection. The air, though invisible, carried a scent she had never known, soft, dry, touched by faraway rain. It filled her lungs differently, and for a heartbeat, she almost forgot to move. She floated there, half in water, half in sky, her eyes wide with quiet awe. The world above was not the roaring, blinding realm her sisters had described. Tonight, it was gentle, a cathedral of blue and silver where clouds drifted slowly like thoughts unspoken. Each star seemed alive, breathing light into the dark. And the moon, the same moon that touched her sea from afar, now looked close enough to whisper to. For a long while she said nothing. She simply watched the reflection of that pale disk tremble upon the water's skin. Each wave caught the image bent. It released it and took it up again, like a secret shared and forgotten, shared and forgotten. She felt as if she were watching her own thoughts, made visible, shimmering, fragile, endlessly reforming. The sea beneath her felt like a living mirror, showing not what she was, but what she dreamed of becoming. She reached out her hand and touched the moon's reflection. The light scattered, instantly dissolving into 100 bright threads that slipped through her fingers. It startled her only for a moment before she smiled softly. Some things were meant to be touched only through wonder. The world above was quiet, yet filled with tiny sounds that the water had always hidden. the sigh of wind gliding over the sea's surface, the faint rustle of waves brushing one another, the almost inaudible creak of a distant ship turning in the current. Each sound was sharp and distinct, not softened by water. They pierced her like starlight, delicate, clear, fleeting. The mermaid tilted her head, listening. It was strange to think that these sounds existed always, yet she had never heard them. She wondered how far they traveled, whether the moon itself could hear them. And then, for the first time, she wondered what her own voice would sound like here in this lighter, freer air. Would it rise differently? Would it drift farther before fading? She opened her mouth slightly and breathed out. A thin sound escaped, barely a hum, so fragile that even she could not tell if it was heard. The air swallowed it almost immediately. Yet she saw the smallest tremor upon the water, as if her note had kissed it. It was enough. She smiled again, her eyes reflecting both the moon and its reflection, her heart beating in time with their shared rhythm. As she floated, a breeze brushed her face, the first touch of the world above. It carried scents that were entirely new, salt mixed with sweetness perhaps from unseen flowers on distant shores. Something smoky faint, like wood remembered from fire. Each breath deepened her curiosity. The sea had always surrounded her, but this air felt like possibility, open, weightless, full of unseen stories. In the far distance, a line of light moved across the horizon. Not the moon, not a star, but something alive. A vessel drifted there, its small lamps trembling across the waves. She watched it pass slowly, its path leaving soft ripples that reached her long after it had gone. She did not know who traveled within it, nor where it sailed. It was enough to know that something else shared the water's surface, something of another world that lived and breathed and dreamed above. She thought of voices within that ship laughter perhaps, or quiet conversation tones that traveled through air instead of water. She imagined how they might sound crisp, warm, shaped by breath rather than current. It was not envy she felt, but a deep, reflective wonder. Her world had taught her that silence could sing, but now she sensed there might be other kinds of songs carried on the wind instead of the tide. The moon climbed higher. Its reflection stretched and shimmered like a path of light leading straight to her. She let herself drift along it, her tail moving gently, keeping her at the surface. The water around her glowed faintly, each movement sending rings of silver outward until they merged with the horizon. It felt as though she were floating inside a dream, her body half real, her thoughts dissolving into the night. For the first time, she felt something like longing, not for a person or a thing, but for understanding. There was a world above and a world below, and she belonged entirely to one, yet carried a small growing wish to touch the other. Her reflection on the water blurred between both realms, a face framed by stars and waves belonging to neither completely. Perhaps she thought that is what beauty truly is, the space between. The longer she watched, the more the boundaries softened. The sea no longer felt separate from the sky. The moon seemed to rest both above and below. It was as though the world itself were breathing in and out, light and dark, heaven and sea, all connected by the simple act of reflection. The mermaid closed her eyes and allowed that rhythm to move through her. Each inhale mirrored the tide coming in, each exhale the tide retreating. It felt like remembering something she had always known. When she opened her eyes again, dawn was touching the horizon. The first shades of rose and gold melted into the silver of night, and the moon began to fade into the growing light. She watched it go without sadness. Every ending in her world was only another form of continuation. The sun would rise and the moon would return, and she would still be here, suspended between them, listening. Before she sank beneath the surface again, she looked one last time at her reflection. It trembled with the colors of both day and night. And for an instant, she thought she saw herself differently, not as a creature of the deep, but as something luminous and whole. Then, with a soft motion, she descended the cool embrace of the water, welcoming her home. The last light of morning followed her downward in small golden threads until they too vanished into blue. Below, everything was quiet again. The ocean resumed its patient breathing. The coral gardens stirred, and the world above became a memory already soft around the edges. But something within her had changed. The sound of the air, the trembling of reflection, the sight of the moon mirrored upon water, all of it had left an echo in her chest. It was not loud, not urgent, just steady, a whisper she would one day follow. So she lay once more upon her familiar stone shelf, the shell near her hand. Inside it, she thought the sound of the surface might still be hiding the faint rush of wind, the hush of distant waves. She pressed it to her ear, and though the sound was the same as always, she heard it differently now. It was as if the ocean had learned a new note, the beginning of something yet unnamed. And as her eyes grew heavy, she felt the world rocking her gently, both sea and sky, moving in one vast, slow rhythm. Between them, she dreamed of mirrors made of light, of voices, made of silence, of a song that belonged to both realms and to neither. Days passed in their slow, luminous rhythm, each one folding into the next, like waves folding into shore. The young mermaid carried within her the quiet of that moonlit night, the taste of air, the trembling reflection of the sky, the faint sound her breath had made above the surface. It lingered in her not as yearning, but as a question that never needed answering. Even when she returned to the calm heart of the sea, something in her had changed in awareness that there were forms of stillness she had not yet known. The ocean around her felt both familiar and new. She moved through it as one might walk through a remembered dream, touching the coral walls with reverence, hearing the slow chorus of the deep with deeper attention than before. She no longer sought to sing, yet music seemed to follow her nonetheless, in the pulse of the current, in the low hum of distant life, in the delicate click of shells turning on the seafloor. Silence had begun to speak in its own language, and she found herself listening to it with tenderness. There came an evening when the water was thick with moonlight, a pale silver veil that made everything seem suspended between waking and dream. The mermaid swam through it slowly, her arms outstretched, her hair drifting like strands of night. Around her, the sea was alive with tiny sparks, plankton glowing softly with every movement, stars of the deep responding to her passing. It felt as though she were being guided not by sight or sound, but by a quiet invitation whispered through the current. In time, she found herself before a cavern she had never seen before, a place where the sea grew darker, but not frighteningly so, as if it were holding its breath. The entrance was framed by ancient stone, and within faint ribbons of light wound like threads through shadow. She hesitated for only a moment, then glided inside. The water there was still cool, almost weightless. Her reflection followed her in every direction, multiplied and softened by the shimmer of trapped bubbles. At the center of the chamber stood a single structure, a pillar of crystal coral, clear as glass, and shaped like a spiral shell that rose toward the cave's unseen ceiling. It pulsed with slow light, its glow deepening and fading as though breathing. The mermaid hovered before it, awed by its calm. When she drew closer, she felt the faint vibration it gave off, not a sound, but something sensed through the skin, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. She touched it lightly, and the glow answered her. For an instant, she felt her own pulse align with its rhythm. And in that meeting, she understood the sea was offering her a gift. Not treasure, not promise, but understanding. To become part of this silence, to surrender her voice, was not to lose herself, but to return to the beginning of sound. For the first time, she realized that even her song had always come from this deeper stillness. Her voice was not something apart from the sea. It was borrowed from it, shaped by it, given back to it. The idea filled her not with fear, but with a kind of serene acceptance. The voices of whales, of current of wind, All would fade in time, yet their echoes would remain within the sea forever. She was no different. To surrender her song would not erase her, it would complete her. She pressed her hand against the glowing coral, closed her eyes, and let her thoughts drift. A warmth spread through her chest, gentle, spreading, infinite. She felt her throat tighten, not in pain, but in transformation, as if the ocean itself were placing a finger against her lips to hush her into peace. The sound within her dimmed, then softened further, until it was only vibration, a pulse moving outward, blending with the hum of the world. Her last note lingered for a heartbeat, pure and tender, before dissolving into quiet. When she opened her eyes again, everything seemed clearer. The sea had not changed yet. Every color now felt softer, deeper. Her senses adjusted. Where once she had filled silence with song, now she could hear its subtler layers. The slow crackle of distant coral breathing, the shifting of sand along hidden ridges. Even the faint echo of her heartbeat felt like a continuation of the sea's own rhythm. She tried to hum again instinctively and found that she could not. But the absence was not emptiness. It was stillness, round, complete, infinite. Her sisters, when they saw her next, noticed the difference before she spoke, or rather before she didn't. They circled her with wide eyes, asking what had happened. But she only smiled the corners of her mouth, curving like the rising of a tide. Her gestures were slow, deliberate calm. She placed a hand over her heart, then on the sea itself, and they understood in their own way that she had chosen this. They could not fathom it, but they felt its peace. In the days that followed, she found herself noticing beauty she had overlooked. The color of the sea at dawn, when it turned the faint hue of pearls. The delicate sway of seaweed responding to invisible tides. The way light rippled down the walls of coral, as if the ocean were painting itself anew each day. Without her voice, she became a listener to the purest degree. Every silence held detail. Every pause contained a story. It was as though the world had grown larger by her letting go of one small part of it. Sometimes she missed the gentle hum that used to vibrate through her throat, the way it felt to shape sound. But even that absence had its own softness. In quiet moments, she could still feel her song alive inside her, not in air, but in the subtle currents that brushed her skin. When she swam, the water seemed to hum faintly around her, as if remembering what she had once sung. She began to realize that silence was not the opposite of sound, but the place from which all sound was born. One twilight, as she drifted along the ocean floor, she discovered a small pearl caught within the petals of an open shell. It glowed faintly like a captured moon. When she lifted it, she could feel a vibration within, a soft echo pulsing in rhythm with her own heart. She smiled gently, knowing what it meant. The sea had given her back her voice in another form, not to speak with, but to carry as memory. She placed the pearl against her throat, feeling its warmth spread outward, like a note that would never fade. Above her, the world of air remained distant, but present, a pale ceiling of promise. She thought sometimes of the sounds that lived there, laughter, wind, rain upon wood, and felt no sorrow in being apart from them. Her silence was not a wall, it was a bridge of stillness, connecting the two worlds. She now understood more clearly than ever. When she closed her eyes, she could imagine both the hush of the sea and the sigh of the wind, the pull of the tide and the pulse of breath, each speaking in their own language of belonging. There were moments when the ocean itself seemed to lean closer to her, as if to listen to what could no longer be said. Its waves folded gently around her, carrying her along currents that led nowhere in particular. In their slow movement, she felt herself dissolve even further into the rhythm of things. Her body, her thoughts, her memory all began to feel porous, as though she were not moving through the water, but becoming part of it. The distinction between where she ended and the sea began grew thinner each day, until it was nearly gone. Sometimes, when she rested among the coral gardens, a curious fish would approach and hover before her, sensing the calm that surrounded her. She would smile, extending a hand, and it would drift nearer unafraid. Even without words, she had found a new way to speak, through presence, through peace. Her silence carried a resonance the sea itself recognized. When she passed, schools of fish followed her like shadows of thought, drawn not by song, but by stillness. The moon continued its patient travel across the sky. On certain nights, when its light reached far enough to pierce the surface and touch her world, she would look up and feel the same reflection she had once seen above. Only now, she no longer reached toward it. She simply watched and let it exist. The longing that once lived in her chest had quieted into calm recognition. There was no need to bridge the worlds. They already met within her. As she drifted one evening through the long corridor of a kelp forest, a gentle current rose, wrapping around her like a sigh. The strands of seaweed swayed in unison, whispering against her skin. For an instant, she thought she heard her old voice not as sound, but as feeling. A memory light as mist moving through her. It did not call her back to what was lost. It reminded her that nothing had ever truly been lost. Her voice, her silence, her being had become one and the same. In that understanding, a peace deeper than sleep filled her. She floated within it, eyes half closed, heart steady. The sea pressed its cool palm against her cheek, and in that touch, she felt what she had been searching for all along. Not the thrill of having a voice, not the ache of being heard, but the still joy of being known by the waters, by the silence, by herself. And so when she finally rested that night upon the ocean floor, surrounded by soft light and endless quiet, she did not think of what she had given up. She thought only of what she had received. A silence that sang without words, a peace that asked for nothing, a belonging that was infinite and kind. Above the waves rolled on, below the coral dreamed, and within the heart of the ocean, the little mermaid glowed softly, her silence radiating like music that only the sea could hear. When the sea had grown used to her silence, and she to its deeper calm, there came a day when the water felt strangely light. The currents near the surface moved with a different kind of intention, not urgent, but gently outward, as though guiding her toward the edge of the known. She rose through shifting shades of blue, past drifting veils of kelp and small curious fish, until the water brightened to the color of morning skies filtered through glass. The scent of salt, sharpened, tinged now with something unfamiliar, the faint dry fragrance of sun-warmed stone and distant earth. When she broke through the surface, the world above greeted her like a long-held breath released. The sky was pale with early light, streaked with soft clouds that looked hand-drawn and then carefully smudged. The sea lay almost perfectly still, only the slightest ripples moving across it, like thoughts too shy to fully form. Off in the distance, the faint outline of a shoreline rested between water and sky, a gentle line of sand and rock touched by low, sleepy waves. A thin mist hovered near the coast, carrying with it the quiet promise of voices not yet awake. She floated there for a while, half in water, half in air, feeling both realms brushing against her skin. The breeze lifted small droplets from her hair, cooling her cheeks with each passing sigh. Above, seabirds traced slow arcs, their wings cutting through the air with soft, rhythmic strokes. Their calls reached her as distant notes, clear but not harsh, like bells heard from far across a valley. She listened with the same attention she had given the ocean's hidden music, and felt the two symphonies begin to overlap within her. The shore drew nearer with every measured movement of her tail. As she approached the soundscape, shifted the gentle crush of waves meeting sand, the occasional hollow rush as water slipped back through pebbles and shells. The quiet groan of wood from a small pier stretching out over the shallows. The air changed too, filling with new scents, damp wood, faint smoke from an extinguished hearth, the earthy sweetness of seaweed resting on rocks, Nothing was loud. It felt as though the land had just woken from its own dream and was still remembering how to be solid. Where the water grew shallow and warm, she paused. Beneath her, the sand glowed pale, patterned with ripples left by the tide. Each ridge and hollow seemed to invite touch. She sank down until her fingers brushed the seafloor, tracing the delicate ridges as though reading a message in a language of lines. In that moment, the boundary between land and sea felt fragile, like a veil of light, waiting to be parted. The sea, which had cradled her all her life, did not resist when she moved toward the shore. Its waves curled around her, gently supporting her, as if guiding a child's first careful steps. There was no wrenching, no ache, only a gradual shift, like waking slowly from a soft dream. By the time her hands found the smooth curve of a rock near the water's edge, the decision had already been made inside her. She would cross not to escape the sea, but to understand the quiet of another world. When she pulled herself onto the rock, the air greeted her with a cool embrace. Her body, made for water, felt unexpectedly light, as though gravity were a kind and curious thing, not yet sure how firmly to hold her. She lay there for a few breaths, feeling the warmth of the stone seep through her skin, the texture of it uneven, grainy, honest, pressing gently into her. Behind her, the water lapped at the rock in small, patient waves, each one a soft reminder that she was never truly leaving it behind. In the hush of early morning, the shoreline village was still. Wooden houses with weathered walls leaned toward the sea, their windows reflecting the pale light. A faint smell of last night's fire lingered in the air, mixed with the comforting hint of dried herbs hanging from eaves. From somewhere farther inland came the gentle bleat of a waking animal, the creak of a cartwheel turned by a sleepy hand. These human sounds were small, delicate things, no larger in their way than the click of shells or the tremor of kelp, and yet they carried a different warmth, a hearth-like closeness. The transformation the old stories feared did not come with pain or thunder. It arrived like a tide. As she rested on the rock, a warmth gathered in her tail, spreading in slow circles outward. The scales softened, melted into a new kind of form, limbs unfolding where fin had been. It was as if the sea were reshaping its own reflection into something that could walk upon the shore. She drew in a long breath as the water slipped away from her newly formed feet, leaving them wet and cool against the stone. There was no sharpness in it, only the unfamiliar weight of standing, the delicate strangeness of legs bearing her forward. She rose slowly, every motion cautious and reverent. Her hands sought balance on the rock fingers, curling around its edges, feeling the roughness, the tiny grains pressing into her palms. When she set her bare feet upon the damp sand, It yielded with a soft sigh, embracing her weight without judgment. Each step left a print behind her, a brief record of her passage, that the next wave would gently erase. She watched the water creep in to soften the edges of each footprint, and felt a quiet comfort in the certainty that nothing here need last to be real. Wrapped in a simple cloth left forgotten on the shore, a fisherman's old garment, salt stiff and sun-faded, she began to walk along the beach. The fabric rasped softly against her skin, carrying the faint smell of sea and smoke of long days in open air. Her fingers smoothed the creases in it as she walked, tracing the worn seams, feeling the story woven into each thread. Above her, the sky grew gradually brighter, though the light remained gentle, as if the day itself had chosen to rise softly for her sake. The village stirred awake in slow motions. A door opened with a low, familiar groan. A bucket clinked against stone as it was set down. Somewhere, bread dough was being kneaded. The sound of hands meeting dough, muffled but steady. She stood a little apart, watching from the shelter of a low dune crowned with tall grasses. The wind combed through the grass, making a hushed, rustling song that mingled with the muted murmur of human movement. She could not speak to them, but she did not feel exiled from their world. Her silence allowed her simply to observe, to savor the gentle ordinariness of their morning. A child, small and sleepy-eyed, wandered toward the shore with a pail in hand. The child's steps were clumsy, but full of quiet purpose, feet sinking into the sand, leaving tiny marks that matched their size. When the child reached the water's edge, they paused, watching the waves gather and retreat, gathering and retreating. The mermaid, now walking softly upon her borrowed legs, watched from a distance, her heart warm with recognition. There was something familiar in the child's stillness, in the way they let the scenes soak into them before moving. The child knelt and began to fill the pail with water, then with shells, then with smooth stones, each selected and turned carefully in small hands. It was a simple ritual, yet to her it looked like a kind of worship, a quiet honoring of the sea. Though she remained unseen, she felt in that shared gaze upon the water an unexpected closeness. Love, she realized, could bloom in the space between beings who never exchanged a single word. It could be as simple as watching the same wave arrive and vanish, feeling the same wind, touch the same skin in different ways. As the day moved forward, she walked slowly along the edge of the village, never quite entering, never quite leaving. She felt the texture of weathered wood under her fingers as she brushed past the posts of an empty pier. The faint stickiness of dried salt clinging to the grain. From an open window drifted the smell of warm bread and herbs, carrying with it the sense of someone needing, shaping, tending. Voices rose and fell, inside low, familiar, flowing through the rooms and out into the air like the gentle lap of waves. She could not understand their words, but she recognized their intention. Care, comfort, small, shared lives. In the quiet corner of the harbor, a solitary figure sat on the end of a dock legs, dangling above the water. A fisher, perhaps, or a keeper of the boats. Their posture was relaxed, shoulders, slightly hunched hands resting loosely in their lap. They looked out toward the horizon with an expression not of longing but of peaceful attention, as though the sight of the open sea was all they needed. The mermaid watched them from the shadow of a nearby boat, feeling an odd, tender kinship. Here was another whose love for the sea was steady, unspoken, and complete. The wind shifted, carrying toward her the faint, wordless hum of a tune. The figure on the dock was humming to themselves, the melody simple and repetitive, like a lullaby remembered from childhood. The sound traveled across the water, reaching her as a soft vibration in her chest. It was the first time she had heard a human voice not raised in shout or song, but resting in its own quiet. She closed her eyes, letting the tones sink into her, layering themselves atop the ocean's deeper music. Her own throat remained still, yet inside she felt as though she were humming along. As shadows lengthened and the sun moved lower, the village settled into a slower pace. Tools were set aside, boats tethered for the night, windows opened to let in the coolness. She walked among the rocks, now following the gentle curve of the shore, as it turned away from the houses and toward more secluded stretches of sand. Here, grasses grew in tufts at the edge of the dunes, their dry stalks whispering against one another in the breeze. The scent of the air changed again, less of smoke and bread, more of wild earth and salt of plants that lived between worlds. She found a place where the sand rose into a small, sheltered hollow. The sea was still in view, its surface turning slowly from blue to molten gold as the sun slipped toward it. She sat there, drawing her knees close, resting her hands on them, feeling the grain of damp sand press lightly into her skin. The fabric around her legs rustled softly when she moved a gentle counterpoint to the murmur of the waves. She watched the light shift, each change of color like another page turning in a book of sky. In that quiet, she understood love in a new way. It was not a dramatic force, not a storm or a fire. It was the warmth that grew in her chest as she watched a child carry water, as she listened to a stranger hum to the sea, as she traced the edges of her own footprints, knowing the next tide would erase them. Love was the soft willingness to be present with what was before her, without needing to claim it, change it, or be seen by it. It was the feeling of being part of a shared stillness, of contributing her own silence as one more note in a gentle, endless chord. The sky finally dimmed into evening, the last light clinging to the horizon in a narrow band of rose and amber. Lanterns flickered to life in the village behind her, their glow spreading across the sand in long, quiet strokes. The smell of night, deepened, cool, slightly sweet, carrying hints of pine from distant inland trees, and the faint metallic tang of stars beginning to show. The sea sighed steadily, darkening into a broad, breathing presence at her feet. She lay back in the hollow, letting the sand hold her shape. Above her, the first stars appeared, scattered across the deepening blue. Their light was gentle, like the memory of the bioluminescent shimmer she had left beneath the waves. Between sea and sky, between village and deep, she rested no longer, trying to belong to one world or the other. Love, she realized, was this a quiet readiness to be here fully, where the edges blurred and everything leaned softly toward everything else. Her eyes grew heavy. The sounds of the shore folded around her, the rhythmic hush of waves, the faint murmur of distant voices, settling into night, the rustle of wind through grass. Her breathing fell into step with the tide rising and falling in a gentle, measured rhythm. Though she could not sing, she felt as though the world itself was singing to her a lullaby made of water, air, earth, and distant light. Wrapped in that harmony, the little mermaid drifted toward sleep, her silence blooming quietly into love that needed no words at all. Time passed in the gentle way it does when one lives without counting it. Days blended into one another like waves folding into waves. No boundaries, only rhythm. The young mermaid, who now walked softly among the dunes and along the quiet shore, felt herself held by two worlds at once. The slow pulsing breath of the ocean behind her and the steady heartbeat of land beneath her feet. She belonged wholly to neither, yet was loved by both. Each morning, she watched the horizon dissolve and reform. The air would glow pink at first, then pale gold. The sea, touched by that light, shimmered with the tenderness of awakening. And always there came that soft whisper, the sound of the tide returning to itself. She had learned its meaning by now, not a command, not a summons, but a conversation. The sea did not demand her back. It simply spoke, and she listened. The village lived its life nearby, quiet and cyclical. Fishermen mended nets, children traced patterns in the sand, elders sat beneath the shade of weathered porches, their eyes half closed against the light. They had come to accept her presence without question. Some thought her a wanderer, some a quiet soul from a distant place. They smiled when they saw her offered food or water, but did not press her with words. Perhaps they sensed in her silence something sacred, an understanding that did not need to be explained. Among them, She found kindness not through speech, but through small gestures. A loaf of bread left by her resting place, a soft shawl draped near her shoulders. When the evening breeze turned cool, a lantern placed discreetly along her path when she walked at night. Each act was simple, and yet each one glowed with the same tenderness that filled her when she looked at the sea. It was love again, but now multiplied the quiet love of people, the enduring love of earth, the eternal love of water. She spent many evenings by the water's edge, her feet buried in wet sand. As the tide crept closer, cooled her skin, and withdrew again. Sometimes she found herself humming though no sound emerged. Her silence had become so full, it seemed to vibrate in the air around her like a tone just beyond hearing. The sea, sensing her nearness, often sent ripples toward her in greeting their edges, curling softly around her ankles. It was a language of touch, now not sound. And in that touch, she could feel the same patience she had known all her life beneath the waves. As summer deepened, the air grew heavy with warmth. The grasses on the dunes swayed slower, their tips brushing against one another like fingers exchanging secrets. The days stretched long and golden, and the sea's surface became a mirror again, calm, endless, reflecting everything without keeping any of it. She would often sit there at the threshold between sand and surf, her hands resting lightly in her lap, eyes half closed. In those hours, she could feel the tides moving inside her just as they moved within the world. One afternoon, while walking along the shoreline, she noticed how the color of the water darkened near the horizon, a deeper blue rolling toward indigo. A quiet breeze stirred the surface, breaking its perfection into gentle waves that reached for her feet. The rhythm was familiar, achingly so. It was the same pulse that had cradled her since birth, the same cadence that had once carried her thoughts into sleep. She knelt, letting her fingertips trail through the shallows, tracing small circles in the foam. The water recognized her touch. It shimmered faintly, then settled again, as if nodding in acknowledgement. The tide was turning. Not only the water, but something within her slow, inevitable kind. She felt no fear, only the faint ache of knowing that cycles do not stop. They simply complete themselves. Every wave that leaves the shore returns again, altered but whole. Every breath drawn must be released. The sea had always taught her this, to hold gently, to let go completely. As twilight deepened, she walked to the far end of the beach, where the land curved and the cliffs began to rise. The air there was cooler, touched by the scent of moss and salt. The waves struck softly against stone, their white edges glowing in the last light. She climbed until she reached a ledge overlooking the open water, a high, quiet place where she could see the world stretch endlessly outward. The sun hovered low, half swallowed by the horizon, and the sky glowed with slow fire fading into lavender. The scene felt vast yet intimate, as though the world itself were whispering a lullaby. She sat there until the first stars appeared. The sea below turned from silver to ink, its surface scattered with the reflections of constellations trembling between ripples. The sound of the waves reached her as a steady, distant heartbeat. It was then, in that tender stillness, that she heard it not with her ears, but with her whole being. A low hum rising from the deep, like a memory returning from far away. It was the song of the ocean itself, and within it, faintly, she could feel her own voice, the one she had given to silence long ago. It came not as sound, but as sensation, a vibration moving through stone, air, water, and skin. It said no words. It asked for nothing. It was simply presence. Love in its purest form, shaped as soundless song. Her eyes softened, her lips curved into a faint smile, and she bowed her head slightly in gratitude more than sorrow. For she understood now the voice she had released had not been lost. It had simply changed form. It had become part of the ocean's breath, and through it, the world still spoke. Tears came, though not from pain. They were clear, shimmering drops that caught the last light of dusk as they fell and mingled with the sea's spray below. Each tear became another ripple, another small offering, dissolving back into the whole. In that moment, she felt herself mirrored perfectly between above and below, both sea and sky, reflected through her being. She was not leaving one world for another. She was becoming both at once. When she returned to the beach, night had fully fallen. The stars overhead mirrored the faint, bioluminescent shimmer that had begun to awaken beneath the waves. The two worlds gleamed in perfect symmetry, like twin dreams facing one another. The air was cool now, fragrant with salt and faint earth, alive with the sound of gentle movement. The sea exhaling the dunes, whispering. Each sound seemed to speak of continuation, of cycles turning unseen. She waded slowly into the shallows until the water reached her knees, then her waist. Each step was deliberate, reverent, filled with calm purpose. The sea folded around her with quiet recognition, as though a long embrace were being renewed. When the next wave arrived, she let it lift her slightly and then set her down again. The sensation was familiar, the body's memory of belonging. She tilted her head back, looking up at the sky where the moon now hung pale and round, and felt the same peace she had known the first night she had broken the surface. There was no dramatic farewell, no sound to mark the moment. Only a quiet understanding that one phase was ending so another could begin. Love had taught her presence. Silence had taught her surrender. Now the sea was teaching her return, the art of letting herself drift back into the rhythm that had always waited for her. She stood still for a long time, the tide rising around her, the water glimmering like melted stars. The shore behind her blurred, the horizon ahead stretched open like the slow exhale of eternity. She closed her eyes and listened. The waves, her breath, the faint call of a night bird, all blended into one long note of peace. And within that note, she heard the truth. The ocean had always sung. Everything leaves, everything returns, everything remains. When she finally stepped forward, the water welcomed her without ceremony. Its cool weight embraced her gently, her body growing lighter with each motion. The salt touched her skin like recognition. Her legs wavered, shimmered, softened, and before long, she was gliding once more, half light, half water through the familiar blue depths of home. Below, the sea's gardens waited unchanged and eternal. Coral towers pulsed with faint color. Fish drifted like thought. In the distance, the great whales moved slowly, their songs rolling through the dark like thunder softened into lullaby. She felt the vibrations reach her, and this time she answered not with sound, but with being, her movement alone completing the harmony. Everywhere around her, she sensed the sea's quiet joy in her return. But within that joy was no ownership, no demand, only the deep knowing of something that has always been whole. The sea had given her voice once, and then silence, and now a balance between the two. Her journey was not about leaving or finding, but about remembering what she had never lost. She drifted deeper, the water cool and darkening, until the surface light became only a faint golden shimmer above. There was peace in that dimness, peace and recognition. Her heart beat slowly in time with the endless tide. For the first time, she did not wonder which world she belonged to. She belonged to both, to all, to the breath between them. As she swam farther from the shore, she looked back once more. The village lights glowed faintly in the distance, flickering like stars caught upon the edge of water. She felt no distance, only connection threads of gentle memory binding her to everything she had touched, every sound she had once heard. Love had not anchored her, it had made her free. And freedom, she now knew, was simply the courage to move with the tide, never against it. The night deepened and the sea grew softer. Around her, the world slowed into stillness. Her movements became small, graceful, dreamlike. The water accepted her back completely, and she in turn accepted it. There was nothing to surrender anymore. She already belonged. Somewhere beyond sight, the moonlight reached down in trembling ribbons, painting her hair in silver. She moved through them quietly, every gesture like part of a slow, sacred dance. The ocean hummed faintly, her voice within it and its voice within her. No separation, no end, only return. The ocean had been waiting all along, not waiting in impatience, but in quiet certainty, the way the shore waits for the tide's return, the way dawn waits beneath the dark. When she slipped once more beneath its surface, the sea received her with infinite gentleness. There was no sound of descent, no great rush of bubbles, only the quiet exchange between water and skin, light and breath, memory and home. The coolness wrapped around her like silk, drawn through air. It pressed softly against her body, neither holding nor pushing, only existing with her. The currents recognized her form. The creatures of the deep paused in their slow drifting to witness the shimmer of her return. Her hair streamed behind her like a dark current of night, her skin luminous against the blue. As she glided downward, the shimmer of moonlight followed, bending and stretching through the water until it dissolved around her like smoke. Below her, the world she had once left unfurled in tranquil beauty. Coral towers glowed faintly, breathing in the dim light. Fields of soft seaweed swayed with the patient rhythm of the tide. Shells lay open like quiet mouths, each holding a fragment of reflected sky. It was all just as she remembered, and yet it was new again, reborn through her silence. Every color, every motion carried an echo of her journey. The warmth of sun, the taste of air, the stillness of love. The sea around her was alive with unspoken welcome. Small schools of fish circled her in spirals, their silvery bodies catching stray glints of light as they passed. The whales' distant songs trembled faintly through the water, low and slow, like the heartbeat of creation itself. Each tone resonated in her bones, reminding her that she too was a note within this vast symphony, no more, no less perfectly placed. She drifted to the valley of coral where she had once lived, her old resting place, still cradled between smooth stones. Time had changed it only slightly. The colors softer now, the sands patterned by the passing of tides. She brushed her hand over the surface and felt the memory of her younger self there. The girl who had once dreamed of sound, who had listened to the sea's voice without yet knowing it was her own. Now her touch carried the calm of understanding. She had gone to the world above, not to lose herself, but to recognize the stillness she already carried within. As she lay upon the sand, her body moved with the water's rhythm, rising and falling almost imperceptibly. There was no distinction now between her movement and the oceans. Her breath, though invisible, pulsed in time with the slow tide. It was not emerging by force. It was a return by resonance, like two notes meeting again to form harmony. Around her, the bioluminescent life began to wake faint pulses of blue and green that appeared wherever she drifted. They clung lightly to her skin, to her hair, to the trailing edges of her form, until it seemed as if she were wrapped in a garment of stars. The light shimmered gently with her every motion, spreading through the water like soft ripples of breath. The sea, illuminated by her presence, breathed with her expanding, contracting, eternal. In that radiant quiet, she remembered the moments of her journey, not as events, but as sensations. The hum of her own voice echoing within a shell, the reflection of the moon trembling upon water, the warmth of sunlight drying her skin, the hush of footsteps in sand, the silence of love shared without words. Each memory drifted past her like a slow current, and she watched them all with affection, knowing none had been lost. They had simply returned home with her. She swam farther into the open expanse where the sea's floor dropped away into twilight blue. There, the world grew vast and quiet, the kind of quiet that fills rather than empties. She turned slowly, gazing upward. The surface gleamed faintly above her, a shifting veil of silver light. It looked fragile, like a border between dream and waking. And for a moment, she saw both worlds at once. The stars above, glittering in the air, and the glowing life beneath, twinkling in the depths. Two constellations, sky and sea, mirroring each other through her. A gentle current rose from below, lifting her hair, tugging softly at her hands. It carried warmth, a steady pulse, like the touch of recognition. The ocean was speaking again, not in words, not in song, but in movement, in the way it circled her, enfolding her in invisible arms. She let her body yield to it, limbs lose her form, swaying as if rocked to sleep. The water's motion slowed, then steadied, until it became indistinguishable from the rhythm of her own pulse. She was being held not by something outside herself, but by herself, expanded into everything. Light shimmered above and below, a soft dialogue between two infinities. The deeper she drifted into stillness, the more radiant the world became. Colors began to blur, then glow gold, blending into blue, blue fading into silver, silver warming into pearl. Shapes softened. Even the edges of her body seemed to waver, as if the sea were painting her outline in light, and then gently erasing it again. The mermaid closed her eyes. Inside, she could feel her silence vibrate, not as emptiness, but as resonance, a continuous, gentle hum that filled her from within. Her mind quieted completely. There were no images, no memories, no boundaries. Only the sensation of being vast, clear, and kind. The sea's embrace was complete now, yet she felt no loss of self. She was not disappearing into it. She was expanding into it. Her heart beat once, twice, then became indistinguishable from the ocean's rhythm. The whale's songs deepened in the distance, a chorus of patience and belonging. Their low voices moved through the dark like wind through an endless forest, shaping the silence rather than breaking it. Every note seemed to travel through her chest, echoing softly in her bones. She realized that her silence was now part of that song, not a missing voice, but the rest between notes that gave the music its meaning. Without silence, sound could not breathe. Without surrender, beauty could not last. She drifted slowly toward the heart of the sea, a place where light gathered as if from memory itself. Here the water glowed not from above or below, but from within. It was the color of moonlight remembered after dreams. The hue of stillness turned radiant. The current that carried her now felt like a pulse, drawing her deeper into the calm. There was no up or down, no near or far, only the vast, quiet presence of being. In that suspended moment, she understood what she had sought through all her wanderings, that peace is not found in the stilling of movement, but in the movement itself. That voice is not lost in silence, but fulfilled by it. And that love, when it stops asking, becomes the ocean itself, everywhere, endless, soft. The sea's embrace grew brighter. She could see her hands glowing faintly, light spilling from her fingertips, as if her body had learned to speak in luminescence instead of sound. The water around her warmed not with heat, but with presence. A living pulse that met her pulse, matched it, and then merged with it. Every part of her thought breath being dissolved into harmony. And in that harmony, there was no need to go forward or back, only to rest. The ocean, once a world she lived in, became something deeper, a body. She shared a consciousness that cradled her own. She was not a visitor here. She was the hush between the waves, the gleam within the pearl, the still light that the sea kept for itself when the world above slept. Her silence, her love, her long journey, all of it had been the sea's way of remembering itself. Far above the moon drifted across the sky, casting its reflection down through the miles of water until it touched her faintly where she lay. The touch was soft as breath, and for an instant, The sea and the sky aligned perfectly, one mirror reflecting the other. Between them, she rested no longer a being apart, but the stillness that connected both. She might have stayed like that for an eternity or for a heartbeat. Time no longer mattered. Her eyes remained closed, her body utterly at ease, her thoughts dissolved. The sea held her. The silence sang through her, and the world for one long moment was completely whole. When the whales sang again, their voices rose not from below, but from within her. Their tones were her own now, the deep, wordless lullaby of belonging. And as the current carried her gently through the glowing blue, she exhaled in peace, her silence echoing through the depths like a final note made of pure light. She had come home, and the ocean, vast and kind, whispered its only truth, that everything returns to what it loves, and everything loved becomes the sea. Night had folded itself completely over the world. The sea lay like silk beneath the moon, every ripple a line of quiet poetry written and rewritten with each passing breath. The stars hung low, mirrored perfectly in the water's skin, until it was impossible to tell which was sky and which was sea. Between them, suspended in light and darkness, both the little mermaid drifted no longer bound to depth or distance, only to stillness. Her body moved with the rhythm of the tide, slow and unthinking, as if she were being breathed by something larger than herself. The water carried her effortlessly, turning her ever so slightly in its arms. Her hair spread around her like a dark halo, glimmering faintly with the echo of the bioluminescent shimmer that had never quite left her. She was not sleeping, nor fully awake. She was resting in that space between where all beginnings and endings are the same. From the heart of the sea rose a sound, soft, low, and endless. It was not made by any creature. It was not even sound, but the memory of sound, the vibration that remains when everything else has quieted. It moved through the water and through her, threading itself into her being, until it was impossible to tell where it began or where it ended. It was the ocean, remembering her voice. Each pulse of that sound carried warmth. It wrapped around her, pulsing gently in time with the rise and fall of her chest. She could feel its resonance in every part of her, not as noise, but as peace, as belonging. The sea had taken her voice, transformed it, and now returned it in its purest form. Silence shaped as song. If someone had stood upon the shore that night and listened, they might have thought they heard the faintest hum carried upon the wind. Not quite music, not quite breath. It would have sounded like the sea speaking to itself in sleep. But here in the deep, it was everything. The song was her, and she was the song. Her eyes remained closed, though even if she had opened them, she would have seen only light. The soft living glow of the sea's core shifting in waves that seemed to pulse in response to her heartbeat. It was no longer the cold light of moon or star, but something warmer, something interior. It was as if the sea had swallowed the dawn and was holding it close, waiting. And then, slowly, she began to rise. Not in struggle or will, but in a movement so natural. It felt like remembering how to breathe. The water parted around her in delicate spirals, carrying her upward through its luminous stillness. The deeper blues lightened to silver, the silver to pearl. Each layer she passed seemed to whisper something: gratitude, recognition, farewell. Though all were only shades of the same voice. When she neared the surface, the moon's reflection came to meet her. It trembled, stretched, gathered itself, and then broke into 1,000 fragments of light that drifted toward her. They did not blind her. They illuminated her, touching her skin like cool fire. She rose through them quietly until her face broke the surface, and she was once more between two infinities, the sea below, the stars above. The air met her softly, filled with salt and night and faint fragrance of rain yet to fall. It did not feel foreign anymore. It felt like another version of the same breath, the ocean exhaling through sky. She floated there, her eyes half open, watching the stars move slowly across the heavens. They seemed to draw closer, bending toward her, as if to listen. And in that moment, she understood her journey had never been about changing worlds. It had been about hearing the same song, sung through different forms: water, air, silence, love. Everywhere she had been, the melody had followed her. It was in the movement of the tide, in the hush of a child by the shore, in the hum of a human voice at dusk, in the unspoken peace that filled her now. It was the same song the sea had always sung, only now she could hear it completely. She opened her mouth not to speak, but to breathe, and the breath that left her was luminous. It shimmered upon the air, spread across the water, and sank again into the sea. One final exhale of light. Where it touched the ocean, glowed brighter for just a moment, before softening again into calm. It was enough. Her story had become part of the tide. Her silence would linger in every wave that folded itself against the shore, in every ripple that carried moonlight to sleeping eyes. The night deepened further. The world hushed, and in that hush, her presence remained not as body, not as voice, but as quiet radiance diffused through the sea. The whales still sang far below, and somewhere, the faint hum of her old song moved within their calls, a hidden harmony. The ocean carried her not as memory, but as motion. the eternal pulse of peace. Above, the first blush of dawn touched the horizon, pale rose melting into blue. The stars dimmed slowly, one by one, until only the moon remained gazing down with a soft, steady light. It seemed to smile as if recognizing its own reflection in the sea's surface. For a long moment, everything water, sky, light, breath existed in perfect stillness. Then, as the day began, the sea inhaled once more. The song continued. It would continue always, in the hush of waves, in the whisper of shells, in the rhythm of every heart that found rest by listening. Those who stood by the water at night might still hear it faintly, a low hum that rises and falls with the tide. They would not know whose voice it was. But perhaps, without realizing it, they would breathe a little slower, feel a little calmer, and in that slowing, hear themselves reflected within it. For the song of the sea is the song of being gentle, endless, forgiving. The Little Mermaid's story does not end in foam or sorrow, but in continuation. Her voice lives in every still moment, where the world remembers how to breathe. In the hush between waves, in the pause between words, in the silence that falls when one finally surrenders to rest. She has become the quiet that holds all sound, the stillness that softens every dream. And if you listen closely here beneath the hush of night, you may feel her too. A presence made of water and light moving slowly through your thoughts, like a tide whispering that all is well and all will always be well. So now, let the breath soften. Let the body grow heavy, the mind still. The sea is holding you as it held her, weightless, calm, infinite. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do. Only to rest in the rhythm of the ocean's song, the song that has no ending, the song that has no beginning, the song that sings itself through every living thing. Pichi, sleep well, dream softly, and may the night hold you kindly.